Honestly, I don't know about you, but I find offbeat openings like the Catalan and even the English opening to be very challenging, especially in classical chess. In today's video, we are going to be looking at how to crush the English opening like a super GM. Let me tell you something. People who play solid openings like the Catalan, the B3 opening, and even the English are positional chess players who are well prepared with their opening repertoires. In most cases, they always play those specific openings. They don't usually change. Anyway, so what do I recommend to play against the English opening? For now, just go pawn to e5. The secret is to imagine as if you are playing against the Sicilian defense now with black pieces. E.g., if I flip the board and start all over, after pawn to e4, black may play c5, which is the Sicilian defense. Against the Sicilian defense, I usually respond with the Alpine variation with c3, and after something like pawn to g6, I just go pawn to d4, so that at the end of the day, I still remain with 2 pawns on the center and start developing all the pieces behind those pawns. The secret is to control the center of the board and ensure to put your king to safety as quickly as possible. Moves like pawn to d5 you're going to see, after which you can just advance, and if knight c6, you just go knight c3 or play my favorite prophylactic move, pawn to a3, which I play in the French defense, maybe preparing for pawn to b4 in the near future, and bishop b2 or bishop e3. And that's the approach we can take even against the English opening. Just play the reversed Alpine variation with pawn to c6 now. Anyway, two moves that we're going to look at are as follows: knight c3 and pawn to g3. These are the most common moves, and the only rule here is if white plays knight c3, you develop your knight to f6. You will see why I say so. Let's begin with pawn to g3. So with pawn to g3, you can just quickly go pawn to c6, playing an equal game. And if white plays the top played move in the master's database, pawn to d4. Honestly, we wanted to go pawn to d5, followed by pawn to e4, connecting our center pawns like we do in the French defense with white. But here we have no time to play pawn to d5 due to pawn takes. So what you can do here is just to go pawn to e4. Next, you want to go pawn to d5 and forget about it. For example, if white continues with bishop g2 or knight c3, whatever, you can just go pawn to d5 and connect your pawns. The secret is just to maintain your two center pawns at all cost, and please do not be tempted to play pawn to f5 for now, because in many cases white usually gains initiative after playing queen b3, pressurizing your king along that diagonal. So you want to play knight f6 on the next move. E.g., if knight c3, you just go knight f6. Think of playing a6 to stop knight b5 in the near future. If pawn takes, you can take back with your c pawn. Let's say bishop g5, because they want to take the d pawn. But let me show you one little trick in this position. You can just go knight d7, as if you are trying to defend this knight. If white ever thinks they can win a free pawn on d5, that will be losing due to queen a5 check. Either the knight or the bishop is going to die. Kind of the elephant gambit trap anyway. So white doesn't have to take. They usually play queen b3 in this position, after which you can just go bishop d6, as if you are not paying attention to this pin. Because once again, white can't take on d5 due to the same trick, queen a5 check. The knight is no longer pinned, so you're going to win either the knight or the bishop. So just play bishop d6 even after queen b3 is played. It looks like white can just take, so that after you take back with your knight, they then do this, trying to win a pawn, because now they think you can't play queen a5 check due to knight c3. But hey, that knight is again free. You can just take it. White can't take due to bishop b4 check, and they are going to lose their queen, just like what we do in the French defense, you guys. So what am I saying? In this type of English opening, just think of playing the reversed Alpine variation, where you connect your center pawns like this and let your knights support each other in this same way. Sooner or later, white is going to be tempted, taking a pawn that appears to be free. In this position after queen b3, I said just go bishop d6, you are okay. So white won't have time to take. They play moves like pawn to e3 or knight h3. Even queen b5 doesn't really work. You can just cast a shot and forget about everything. Okay, this time white can take on d5 now, knowing that there is no queen a5 check. But who cares? You can just go pawn to a6. They have to play queen a4 to prevent queen a5 check from happening. So queen a4 is forced. Remember, we are down a pawn. How can we get it back? You go knight b6. This is okay. You are attacking the queen. Once again, if white takes on f6 with check, they are going to lose a piece after pawn takes. Look how aggressive this opening can be, you guys. Anyway, white has to take back with the bishop according to theory, after which you have to take back with your g pawn according to Stockfish, and after knight takes, you simply go queen takes b6, attacking the b2 pawn or so. But after bishop takes, you first of all want to attack that bishop with tempo. Whatever they do next, that's when you take back on b2, and there are some real problems here. Maybe they should play this move. And now look at this. This would just be an open game. In fact, here I would play something like bishop e6, d5, have bishop b4 check, king f1, bishop d7. Oh, that bishop is free. Whoops. But there's a nasty tactic involving queen c2, also protecting the f5 pawn and not allowing queen a4 to be played by white. If rook a1, only sensible move. Now you have bishop c3, and white should give up their rook. There's nothing they can do. The best try would be bishop h3, after which you can just take on a1. If this, you're going to win the endgame since you're up an exchange. If bishop takes, you simply go queen d1 check, and after king g2, you have rook a d8. Now it's just a matter of finding the fastest way to exchange queens and go straight into the end game. You are just up an exchange. So once again, the goal is just to connect your center pawns. Even if white plays bishop g2 on move number 3, you go d5. They will usually take, and then you take back. Remember to just protect your center pawns at all cost. If knight c3, go d4. If knight e4, you trap that knight. If they play pawn to d4, you go pawn to e4. Say knight c3, what do? You can go bishop b4, get rid of that knight so that you don't worry about losing your pawn. Or start with knight f6, inviting bishop g5 to create that little trap, because you know that if knight takes d5, you will walk away with a free piece, either the knight or the bishop. So the plan is knight b d7, bishop d6, and castle short. Once again, after knight b d7, if white plays queen b3, you know what to do. Again, you just go bishop d6, waiting for the same trap to happen. I showed you what to do. If queen b5, stopping queen a5 in the near future. I said you should just castle short. Again, if knight takes d5, you remember to go s6, and there are some problems here. If knight takes, white is going to lose a free piece. If bishop takes, instead of gf, this time you can even take back with your knight. Knight takes check, then queen takes. The queen is still under attack. If queen c4, you go bishop e6, d5, queen takes b2. There are just so many traps that you can take advantage of if you think about it. So I better stop right here. In fact, in this position, you can even play rook sc8. White is losing. Maybe they should play rook d1, after which you go bishop check and king f1, same stuff, rook sc8. Just so many tactics. Queen b3, rook c1, and threaten to take that queen on the next move. By the way, you can check out my English opening course at www.KaspaChess.com or on my Patreon page. That's how you support this channel. I don't ask for donations or free money. So the way you support this channel is by joining one of our membership tiers on Patreon or simply buying my courses. That really helps. Anyway, I just wanted to show you what may happen after pawn to g3, then c6. You can see what people do when you play pawn to c6. They don't continue with their usual plan, bishop g2 and knight c3, because by this time they realize you want to play the reversed Alpine variation. That's why they play pawn to d4. So never be scared of this. Just go pawn to e4, and if bishop g2 or knight c3, you simply go pawn to d5. The position will transpose. Don't just think of playing pawn to f5 like I said. In the near future, you will play knight f6, knight b d7, and bishop d6. That's set up. But wait, after you play pawn to e4, white can rush out with this move d5. For example, you start with bishop b4 check. This time, your opponent will most likely block with their bishop, not with their elbow or with their stomach. Here, the best thing you can do to equalize the game is to go queen e7 and then continue developing your other pieces castle short. But hey, how about just playing pawn to e3? This is also playable and confusing. You just want to mess up white's pawn structure so that they no longer hold on to their English position. Point is, if bishop takes, now you take on f2 with tempo. This is check. Next, you want to promote into a donkey if you want. So white has to take. And then you go queen b6 check. So you just made your opponent lose their right to castle. On the next move, you win back a piece. So this is just a sideline. But hey, after you play pawn to e3, it's not every time you're going to see your opponents taking your bishop. In fact, the top played move here is pawn takes. So what? Did we just give up a free pawn? Yeah, sort of. We did this to mess up white's pawn structure on the center. After this, you can play queen e7 or just go pawn to a5. No need to take, because if you take, you're just helping your opponent to develop their pieces somehow. So just go pawn to a5. It's better if they take you and then you create a semi-open file along this file. And white has many weaknesses. You play queen e7. This is kind of a clear and sacrifice just to increase many weaknesses for white. E.g., let's say they play bishop. First, I would play pawn to d6 in this position. If dc, I would take back with the knight. If knight f3, I would go knight f6. Not worrying about these doubled pawns. These are long-term weaknesses. We just leave them like that. Castle short, say queen d3, we go queen e7 and start pressurizing that isolated pawn. Sooner or later, we are going to get it back. If you want to develop your queen's knight, by the way, you can consider taking on d5 and then develop it like this or through s6. That's how we do it. So you used that e3 pawn to slow down white's development, and that will be our point of attack. Anyway, after pawn to e3, again, if they take, you just remember to go a5. Sometimes after bishop takes and a takes, white may play queen d4, targeting your g7 pawn, but here you can just go knight f6, and after pawn to e4, maybe they want to do this, you can simply go pawn to d6. If pawn to e5, instead of taking, you first of all go pawn to c5. Knight g4 also works, but pawn to c5 is an immediate threat. And after something like queen f4, you have knight h5. Queen h4 will be bad. You can just take and take back that pawn. Probably you are going to be up a pawn. If they play queen f3, attacking your knight, now you have time to develop another piece, which is the queen, indirectly also attacking this pawn. They can't play g4. You have bishop takes. If h5, don't even take on g3. You have a better move, queen c1 check. After king f2, you go for the rook. Yes, they can take your knight, but you can just take the rook, also attacking the knight. They have no time to rescue that knight due to queen d4 check, and they must go back. And then you go rook takes a2. This is very bad, although it looks risky. And this was all due to this pawn on e5. So this is how you continue attacking if your opponent tries to be aggressive. Queen d4 and pawn to e4. Don't be scared of these. Just go pawn to d6. If e5, you go c5. Even knight g4 works. Don't just take to give back a tempo. So these are just little tricks that I wanted to show you in this line. Once again, after e4 and pawn to d5, just go bishop b4 check. If bishop d2, you know what to do. After pawn takes, again, you know what to do. Just go a5. Now this time, if they don't take, say they go pawn to a3, yes, you can take, but you don't need to help your opponent, develop their pieces with tempo. Bishop c5 carries more weight, because after you play queen e7, you'll be double attacking that pawn. They may play bishop g2 now, and then you go knight f6. Look at this. What else? Maybe knight f3, and then you castle short, or play pawn to d6. The good part of this is there is no memorization needed. You can play any move that makes a lot of sense. This is a long-term weakness, as I said. I mean, the pawn on e3, if they castle short, you can even take on d5. After pawn takes, you castle short. It'll be easier for you to get back that e3 pawn if you think about it. Even if they play knight c3, you just go rook e8. What can they do? Queen c1, knight g4. But anyway, due to knight d4, you can just play something else here. Something like knight b d7, so that if knight d4 comes, you put your knight on e5 and dominate the center of the board. The thing is, white has no play. All of white's pieces are glued to this pawn. That's what I meant by slowing down white's development. Anyway, so once again, pawn to g3, you just go c6. If d4, you go e4. If pawn to d5, you just go bishop b4 first. If they block with their knight, you can take if you want, or play pawn to d6 or knight f6, anything that makes sense to you. Even pawn to e3 again to slow down white's development, because I mean, you just want to do your things. Again, knight f6 is okay. Pawn takes is okay. Even d6 is okay. I would do this. a3, bishop c5. Knight e4, knight f6. Knight takes, dc. If pawn takes, this trade is only good for black. And knight takes c6, you develop your bishop, castle long. So in the g3 line, the whole point once again is just to connect your center pawns. given a chance. If white plays bishop g2 even in this position, you can just go d5 and forget about it. If knight c3, maybe you even change your mind, you go d4, occupying some more central space. Knight e4. These are rare cases where it makes sense for you to go pawn to f5 because the knight is trapped. Anyway, your opponents won't do that. If they play something like knight a4, you just continue with your normal development. Never think of playing pawn to f5 unless there is a free piece to take. So knight f6, they play pawn to e3. You can take if you want and then do that. For now, enough of the g3 line. Maybe let's look at the knight c3 line. After knight c3, what did I say in the intro? Knight c3 on move 2 equals to knight f6. See why pawn to c6 doesn't make a lot of sense. You can't just start with the reversed Alpine variation like this due to pawn to d4 immediately. That's one. And even knight f3. For example, after pawn to d4, now you can't easily go pawn to e4 due to the presence of this knight. But anyways, according to Stockfish, even this is okay. You can continue playing in the style of the Albin counter gambit. Go d5, knowing that if d takes e5 happen, you have pawn to d4, and after knight e4, you simply get back your pawn like this. Queen a5 check once again. By the way, if queen d2 blocks, you have bishop b4, so they have to block like this, and then you get back your pawn. They can't play knight f3, they are going to lose their knight, so they have to play knight g3 here, and then you bring back your queen to c7 like this, pap, or sometimes start with pawn to c5 so that knight f3 can be met with queen c7. You go knight c6 next and finish your development. If pawn to e3, what I advise to do is not to develop knight c6, even though that's fine. You don't want to remain with an isolated pawn along the d file, so you just oversimplify the position like that. After bishop takes e3, this is when you play knight c6 or bishop e7 or knight f6. I love knight f6. Simple development. After bishop d3, you go bishop e7, castle short, and then you start thinking of developing your other remaining pieces. So this is how you neutralize the English opening with the reversed Alpine variation. So what do you do whenever you see knight c3? What I recommend to do is to go knight f6. With knight f6, now you make it easier to go c6 next. English players play pawn to g3 on move number 3 in most cases. And now this is when you can go c6 if you want. Now it makes sense because see the difference. If pawn to d4 happens, you can simply go pawn to e4 supported by your king's knight. That's why you always want to develop your knight first before playing c6 in the knight c3 line. Again, if pawn to d5 is played, you remember to go bishop b4 like before. You want to take. By the way, if pawn takes, you first mess up your opponent's pawn structure on the queen side and then take back with your knight. Sometimes you can also take back with your pawn, knowing that you will still connect your pawns like these. Or maybe go queen a5. Pawn takes. If c4, you go bishop b7 if you want, or bishop e6, or just castle short. Because if pawn takes happens, this pawn is already a dead pawn. Just defend what you can. Go bishop f5, or sometimes start like this. But anyway, bishop f5, you want to take back on d5 with your knight, and there's nothing that white can do. Maybe pawn to d6, but you have rook e8. This pawn is already a dead pawn. Even if they play bishop a3, it doesn't even matter. You have queen a5 check. You're going to win that. So the idea is to go knight f6 in the knight c3 line. After pawn to g3, you go c6. If they continue normally with bishop g2, you go d5. No more reversed Alpine variation. If pawn takes, you take back. If queen b3 like they do in the French with black pieces, to avoid everything, you can go pawn to e4 in this position. This is okay, but be ready to meet moves like pawn to d3. What I advise to do in these positions, you just have to take, but knight c6 is also fine because if pawn takes, you can just take back. And if knight takes, you have this intermediate move, bishop b4 check. Say bishop d2, you take. And after knight takes, yes, you are down a pawn for the time being, but with many open lines and an active position. So all you have to do here is just to put your king to safety or rush out with knight d4. Because this attacks the queen and it will be pointless for white to give you a check on a4 due to pawn to b5, quick development. And if check, you have bishop e6 developing a minor piece with tempo, and there is this move coming. So they have to play something like rook c1 to bribe you. But again, you have this, and if rook takes, you just take back with your queen. It looks like your knight is free. At the end of the day, there's mate in one. There are all these traps that can happen if you play this correctly, and so you just don't give up easily. I hope you learned one or two things, and maybe you have a new repertoire against the English opening. So let me know what you think in the comment section down below about this opening response to the English.